Good morning, church. Good morning. It's nice to be here. I entitled the sermon today, The Real You, as you can see. Last time I preached here at the end of last year, you remember I preached on hands and feet, if you were here. This is second part of that sermon. So talking about us being the hands and feet of Jesus, but who is actually able to do that. In this sermon, I do want to give one quick warning because we are going to be talking about a woman whose profession was that of a prostitute. So for those who have children here and have to answer any questions about such things, I apologize for that in advance. I was even going to start making some jokes about Bruce and then decided it was just completely inappropriate, Bruce. And I've decided to leave you out of it as much as possible today, okay? So you can have a day off. I'm just kidding. No. Numbers is a book that we don't read a lot from. I mean, who here in the last week has opened their Bible to the book of Numbers in any of your own Bible study? Anyone? Has that been... No? Okay, so not a very, very popular book. You will need your Bibles today. I'm not going to be putting them up on the screen except for one verse, and that is because I actually want us to pull out our Bibles. So I don't care what kind of device it is, but you will need them quite a bit today. We're going to start with Numbers. Eloise, as I like to do, I like to get the kids involved. Eloise, are you around? Could you come up here? So let's get you a microphone. Any of these working? Don't worry, we'll use this one. I will get her to read out a verse here that I want to start with.
Numbers 11, verse 18 to 20. God heard you when you were whinging. We just want some meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. You want meat? God will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not just eat it for 1 day or 2 or even 5, 10 or 20 days, but for a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils, and it will make you sick and you will hate it.
Thank you. We're just doing a quick promo for Sanitarium to start the sermon. Why am I bringing this up when we're about to talk about Rahab? Because Rahab's story starts well before we actually get to the book of Joshua. Rahab's story, I want to tell this story today, and we're going to tell it from start to finish. And it doesn't just start when spies arrive on Rahab's door. Because we've got to work out who she's actually dealing with at the moment. Who are these people who are entering her land? And we go back to the book of Numbers. The children of Israel, as you well know, are some of the most whingy, whiny group of people at that time. They've been brought out of Egypt, which they were so happy about. But as soon as they've gotten out, they got to the Red Sea and they're already whinging, going, Moses, you've brought us out of Egypt just to die here, trapped. That's literally day one. And it has continued on and on and on since then, till they get to this point and they're like, we just want meat. We'd be better off in Egypt. Give us meat. So God says, fine, you want meat? I'm going to give it to you. You're going to eat it for a whole month until you are sick of it and it is coming out of your nostrils. Numbers 13, 18 to 20. So we're going to start reading the story here. Be sure to remember how many people live there, how strong they are, and if they live in open towns or walled cities. Who is being spoken about here? Have a read of the verse or so before. What is going on in Numbers 13, 18 to 20 at the moment? Come on, this should be an interactive sermon. Who's being spoken about here? Moses is talking to who? We were just talking about the kids, spies, 12 spies about to be sent into the land of Canaan to find out exactly what they were up against. See if the land is good for growing crops and find out what kind of trees grow. If it's time for grapes to ripen, bring back some of the fruit that grows there. We get to 25 and 27. After exploring the land of Canaan 40 days, the 12 men returned. And they told Moses, Aaron, and the people what they had seen. They showed them the fruit and said, "Look at this fruit. The land we explored is rich with milk and honey." And if they'd stopped there, it would have been a great report to have brought back for the Israelites. Another lesson out of this whole story, and one that most of you will probably agree with me, I haven't even learned yet, is knowing when to stop talking. And for these 12 spies, they missed the boat on that. We get to 28 and 29. The people who live there are strong, they said. So these are the spies talking. Their cities are large and walled. We even saw 3 Anakim clans. Besides that, the Amalekites who live in the southern desert, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites are in the hill country, and the Canaanites live along the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. They are describing people who are scary. Giants, some of them. The other men, remember there were how many good spies who came back saying, "We can do this," out of the 12? 2. 2 spies, Caleb and Joshua, who came back saying, "We can do this." So the other 10 then start to spread rumors amongst the people of Israel saying how scary this place is and we shouldn't go there. We should hold back. We shouldn't go there even though God has told us that that is where we belong. We cross across to Numbers 14, 6 to 9. Numbers 14, 6 to 9. Anyone want to read this out for us? You've got a loud voice. You want to read out Numbers 14, 6 to 9? Come on, Russ.
Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, "The land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them."
So these 2 guys, this is all leading up to Rahab, which isn't going to occur for another 40 years. These 2 men, Joshua and Caleb, come back and say, just as Russ read out then, we can do this because we have one thing they do not have. And that is God absolutely with us on our side with a promise that he has made. And when a father or a mother gives a promise to one of their children, as a parent, I have realized you do everything in your power to keep that promise. Because as soon as you break that first promise to them, trust is eroded. God had promised these people this land of milk and honey. So now we skip forward in time. We are now going to be going into the book of Joshua. We skip 40 years because what happened? Because of those 10 spies spreading rumors and making the Israelites scared, God said, fine, guess what? None of you who are alive today outside of those 2 spies who said good things about it, Caleb and Joshua, none of you will enter the promised land. And they wandered and they wandered and they walked and walked and walked literally around that desert for the next 4 decades. And then we get, they had a lot of time to learn here. Then we get to Joshua, chapter 2, verse 1. And again, we're talking about Joshua, the man with no parents. Yes, Joshua, the son of Nun. He secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim, and it's a long I there, so just be careful. Go and look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So how many spies did Joshua send this time going into Canaan? Last time Moses sent in 12. How many is Joshua sending this time? 2. He is learning from the mistakes of the past. 2 is all he needs to get an accurate description of what is going on. He doesn't need 12 people this time to come back and start talking amongst themselves. He just wants the truth. Because sometimes too many cooks can what? They can spoil the broth, they can spoil the dinner, they can spoil everything. When I'm cooking in the kitchen and Em comes in to try and give me a hand, it's never a good thing. The food never works out as well. Just leave me alone, let me do my cooking. I can make this bowl of cereal very successfully. I do not need your help at all. There is a lesson to be learned here as well. When reading up about this and watching people who have spoken about the story of Rahab, one thing kept coming up. We as humans, when we want to have an opinion of somebody, when we truly want to know somebody else's opinion, and there are going to be people in your lives, if you look around you today, think about who is around you in your life, you will have a very select few whose opinion could actually change your mind on something. Very, very few. They actually say that once you've gotten past 2 people and you're on to your 3rd, 4th, and 5th person that you're asking an opinion for on something, then you've actually gone past the point of wanting an opinion and you're now just simply wanting affirmation for what you want to do. So think very carefully about the people you surround yourself with and ask their opinion of. Because a lot of the time we are simply getting affirmation on what we already want ourselves. This time Joshua sends 2 people. He hears their opinion. That's all he wants. So he sends them off, and into Jericho they go. So these 2 fearless warriors, these 2 hand-picked warriors that Joshua has chosen, knowing, you've got to remember, and that's why we went back 40 years ago. 40 years ago when Joshua was sent in, he knew what happened when they came back with the wrong report. 40 years they've been wandering. Joshua will have seen all of his friends die during this time. None of them were going to enter the promised land. His peers are no longer around. And he is petrified. So you think of the 2 men he sends into Jericho would have to be some of the most trusted people he knows. Where do they go when they get to Jericho? Where do they go and stay? This is part of the story which defies our normal Christian common sense. Mind-blown kind of experience when you realize that if you rip a hole in a net, you've actually decreased the number of holes in the net. We go back to Joshua 2:1. It says, the spies left the Israelite camp and went to Jericho, where they decided to spend the night at the house of a prostitute named Rahab. When you are going off to start doing God's business, for me, and according to my wife, going to stay at a prostitute's house is not the best way to start. And that is where his 2 trusted men go. We skip through to Joshua 2:2-7. Somebody found out about them though, and they told the king of Jericho, some Israelite men came here tonight and they're spies. How did they know? Somebody was keeping a pretty good eye on Rahab's house. So the king sent soldiers to her house to arrest these spies. But meanwhile, Rahab had taken the men up to her roof and had hidden them under some piles of flax plants or seeds, long things that she had put there to dry. It is very safe to assume that this is probably not the first time Rahab has had to hide men in her house. God uses the talents you have. The soldiers had come to her door and they demanded, "Let us have the men who are staying at your house. They're spies." And Rahab, in her very truthful, Christian-orientated response, says, "Some men did come to my house, but I didn't know where they'd come from, so they left about sunset just before it was time to close the gates of the city. I don't know where they were going, but if you hurry, you could probably still catch them." So here she is, she's just building her resume, this woman who God is using, this lying prostitute is still the person that God has sent these two men to stay with. She's just lied to the king of Jericho, her king, her people. For what? To protect two Israelite spies, literally her enemy. Literally, as we'll find out in a second, somebody she is petrified is going to take her and her family. We live in a world today where, as you look at the screen, most people here will know most of those icons. Reg, you awake? Just kidding, I love you, Reg. You know any of these icons here, Reg? Some of them. They're pretty famous, aren't they? It doesn't matter age, where you're from. You will all know some of these icons here. Some of the biggest social media companies going around. And it's really interesting at the moment, talking about being the real you, how much it is such a big thing to be true and real in social media. Because these days, if you read the newspaper, you'll often see people getting applauded or lauded for simply being real on social media. You know, for putting up a photo without the makeup, for putting out a photo that doesn't have any editing, for putting up a photo showing real life behind where your normal photos come from. And they're the people at the moment who are getting the applause on social media for trying to keep it real. Isn't it interesting that as a world we've gotten to a stage where we are now applauded simply for being honest, for simply telling it how it is. We live in a world where, and it's going to be even tougher for my kids, I guess, the next generation, generations to come, where the world seems more concerned about how they seem versus who they really are. Even in marketing, I got this email through this week from one of the travel companies, came in, and as you can see from the title of it, it has one of the most Instagrammable pools. So it is now even in mainstream marketing that really come and stay here because you'll be able to put up a great photo on your social media which will really make all of your friends jealous. So come here because there are hotels now literally building. The Marriott has also put out a statement saying they are building hotels at the moment that are much more photogenic because they want to encourage people who are going to bring their Instagram accounts, their Facebook accounts, their Snapchat, their whatever along, take photos and get that kind of exposure. We all love to put up all the wonderful things about our lives. And I'd love to know if Rahab had social media at the time, what would her feed look like? What would she be posting? Anything at all? Or would she leave a very, very private life? I suspect she wouldn't be posting up photos of all of her customers. That would be bad news for business. But she might be posting some really nice photos of herself that might make her even more alluring. And when you look through your feeds and you'll know there are people who, put up first-class upgrades they've gotten. Actually, that was mine. Don't worry about that one. We love letting people know when exciting things happen to us, when great things, out of the ordinary things occur. And it's fun. But it also has made our lives look so much better than what they often are. We get really excited to see friends, what they're doing, all the exciting stuff. the extraordinary parts of our lives versus what is really happening. You go to a cafe now and you look around, or a restaurant, and what are most people doing? They're on a device of some description, yes? And I mean, as parents, we spend our whole lives just trying to work out how to minimize screen time so that we can keep it for when we need it the most for our kids. But if you walk out to a restaurant with a group of people sitting there, I was having a haircut yesterday to obviously look my best today. Supposedly it didn't work. But when I was sitting there, I was literally sitting there. I was at Carindale and looking around, and I am not lying here. Every single person along there that you could see in all the mirrors while having their haircut were just engrossed with the mesmerizing swiping up and down. So I obviously had to get my phone out to take photos of it. But it's really quite interesting how things have actually changed. A photographer, Eric Pickerskill, awesome guy, if you have a look at his website too. He did a project called Removed. I'm not going to go through all of it, but he ended up doing and taking photographs of what life actually looks like in today's age, in this real world that we live in now, if we simply take away a device out of our actual lives. They're interesting photos to look at and to think about what we're actually doing in our lives in this era. Any of these ring true? I mean, if you put the devices back in. In this world, how do you even do things like interact with your husband or wife in a intimate manner? The one that brings along children. When all you've probably ever known is pornography on the internet. Because the one thing that studies are showing at the moment is that is so not real, that is so not real life, and yet by the time kids are getting to the stage of becoming adults, who are getting married, and obviously much more before that, but for getting married and to having their first intimate experience with the person that God has given to them, how does that occur really when all you've known is the fake world that is out there? And this is who we are becoming as a society. So Rahab the prostitute, and why do I keep calling her that? Because every time she is spoken about in the Bible, that is how the Bible refers to her, and we'll get to that in a second. She responds to the men that she is currently hiding. Joshua 2, 9 to 11. Open this up in your Bibles. Joshua 2, 9 to 11. I know that the Lord, this is Rahab speaking, I know that the Lord has given Israel this land. Everyone shakes with fear because of you. We heard how the Lord dried up the Red Sea so you could leave Egypt. That was how long ago? 40 years ago. And they're still talking about it in Jericho. We heard how you destroyed Sihon and Og and the two Amorite kings east of the Jordan. We know that the Lord your God rules heaven and earth. Not I, we know the Lord your God rules heaven and earth, and we've lost our courage and will to fight. This is Israel's enemy telling them that they, Jericho, are petrified of them and have been for 40 years. That if they had gone in 40 years ago with those spies, these people were already petrified of the power of God. And they had too little faith, or at least 10 of those spies did, to go across. She preached an amazing sermon to them just then. Who the Lord is, what he's done, and the fact that he rules heaven and earth. One of the most succinct, perfect sermons you'll ever hear. Said by a prostitute to some spies she was hiding in her house who were about to come and attack her city and level it. Matthew talks about her in his genealogy, where he starts, Matthew 1, if you remember. It would sound very much, how many people here, at some point, you've probably read Matthew 1, the genealogy of Jesus, all the way through, yes? When you read it, actually this week, they were announcing the Oscars this week. And the hosts who were going through, what's her name? Issa Rae. She was announcing the Best Directors list this year. And it made news because as she went through every single one for Best Movie Director of the Year that is up for an Oscar in the nominations, at the end, she congratulated the all-male list. But if you read through Matthew 1 and the genealogy, guess what is very apparent? It is dominated by men. And that makes Rahab even more special. Matthew 1, verse 5, just 5 women are mentioned in all of the different generations here. Matthew 1, verse 5, Salmon, the father of Boaz, who you've probably heard of, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. So David's great-great-grandma is Rahab. In this list, to get to Jesus, you have to go through Rahab. Why choose her? It has got to be a question that has vexed us over the years as to why she was chosen to not only be the person the spies went to, but to be part of this genealogy as well. Because God uses you where you are, the real you. God, I will guarantee, does not have to wait until you are ready, until you are settled, until you have no sin in your life to be used. To be those hands and feet that we spoke about last time. God chooses people not based on how we judge them or how we box somebody in, or even more importantly, who and how we label people. And we do. You look around this room right now, I will guarantee you have labels for people in this room. I am not going to go through some of the labels I have for you. Bruce, I have a good one though. But we have labels for every single person that we know. We know them as emotional. We know them as trustworthy. We know them as sincere. We know them as hypocritical. We know good and bad. Your friends, your family, you'll have words to describe them which we would deem to be a label. And God says, scrap the labels. God chooses and uses you based on how He knows you. And He only uses a few labels in the Bible that are positive. You know, faithful is probably the biggest one. And that is who He uses. God doesn't scroll through social media to find somebody who has the most amount of followers on your Instagram account. Jesus only had 12. God doesn't choose someone based on what other people think of them, but He chooses them in spite of what other people think of them. Because who here honestly, and I mean honestly, don't put your hand up or yell it out, who here honestly, if you were told today that the person being used to bring you closer to Christ was a prostitute, would sincerely run with that? Really? Or would we label, judge, go, oh, I've got to be careful here, this is... This woman is so important in the story of the Bible, literally from the early books of the Bible when her story starts with the spies going in, or, the 12 spies even. And she goes all the way through into the New Testament. Bibles, Hebrews 11, please open them. Hebrews 11, verse 31. And it says in there, Rahab had been a prostitute, but she had what? Anyone's translation? She'd been a prostitute, but what did she now have? Faith. She had faith. And she welcomed the spies. So she wasn't killed with the people who disobeyed. What else can I say, the writer says? There isn't enough time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Japheth, David, Samuel, and the other prophets. So the book of Hebrews is saying there's not enough time to tell you about David, there's not enough time to tell you about Samson here, but let me tell you about Rahab. Let me tell you about this woman, this prostitute, but we don't have time to talk about the other guys. Then we skip across to James chapter 2, verse 25. Rahab had been a prostitute, but she pleased God when she welcomed the spies and sent them home by another way. This is New Testament now. So was Hebrews, but James is New Testament here, and they're still talking about how she was so important in the life of the Israelites. The Bible keeps labeling her. Every time it talks about her, it labels her. But it also says she was faithful and she was promised life and not death. God, did he change her before he used her? When those spies went into her house that night, had she already been changed? Was she a different woman at that point? What are we told about her? The label the Bible uses still at that point was they went to the house of Rahab the prostitute. Not Rahab the reformed, not Rahab the previously, occupied with male clientele person. She was not changed at this point. God didn't need her to be changed to use her. God's love is not a reward for changing, it's the pathway. Rahab is not somebody you probably go out and yell about and sort of poster child for the Bible, is it? We don't often start with those stories about, look at her, look at what she did, wasn't she great? We don't write as many songs about Rahab as what we did about David and what he did. She's not somebody you tell your wife is the person you most want to meet in heaven. Hey, Em, I can't wait to get to heaven and hang out with Rahab. How good's that going to be? She was also somebody whose name and occupation could have easily been left out of the Bible, and she still could have done what she did. She could have just been Rahab, and it still would have been an amazing story. This woman, this enemy of Israel, housing the spies, protecting them, lying for them, letting them escape, hanging out that scarlet cord out the window, and having her house be the only one to survive when they walked around that city. An amazing story. But the Bible took it so much further. And the only reason, I believe, is because God knows we love labels. It touches a nerve sometimes to find out how much he loves other people who don't seem to be doing the right thing like we are. And in heaven, when we get there, you're not going to find, I believe, Rahab the prostitute in heaven. She'll just be Rahab. Because I really don't think our pasts are going to travel with us. The labels that we have put on people here on earth are going to travel there with us. Because we are going to be so new so blessed by God that they just simply won't matter. But there is one little kicker to this story. Although God chose her, she still had to choose God. Because you think back to the spies, 12 spies chosen by God, sent into that country. How many chose God? 2. The other 10 were still chosen by God. They were literally handpicked out of the 12 tribes of evil. 12 tribes of Israel, handpicked to be somebody trustworthy and important enough to go into that country and bring back an honest report. And yet 10 of them still did not choose God. Rahab did. She still had to do things too. She still had to physically go and get that red cord and hang it out that window. The Bible says she saved her family as well. Now, we don't know the backstory, it doesn't tell us. But stories of the time, historians tell us that if you were a prostitute back in this particular era as well, you were probably already removed from your family. Your family were not proud of what you did. And everybody in the town knew who you were. And yet she was somehow also able to get her family, an extended family, and everyone back to her house to save them before the walls fell down. Can you imagine that story? You're Rahab. You're going back out to your immediate family, your extended family, and trying to convince them that 2 spies from Israel are going to save your life and their life when everything else collapses around them, that your house is still going to be saved. And you're trying to convince your family about this. Sometimes it takes a while for us to believe that God has also chosen us. Genesis 17:17. I'll just quickly go through this. Abraham bowed his face to the ground and thought, Can you take us to the slide of Genesis 17:17? I think it skipped all the way back to the start. Genesis 17:17. Abraham bowed his face to the ground and thought, I'm almost 100 years old. How can I become a father? And Sarah is 90. How can she have a child? So he starts what? What did Abraham start doing? He is giggling. He is laughing at the sheer absurdity of this. Who here is near 100? I'm not calling your name out. I thought about it. But seriously, would you want to have children right now? At 100, are you ready to start that process? Of course he starts laughing. Getting chosen by God doesn't mean that you will let him use the real you, because as I said, those 10 spies were chosen, but peer pressure got to them more than God. But then we get back to Rahab, fear consuming her about what's going to go on. She just said that in her little mini sermonette. We are petrified of you guys. We know the power you have, but I'm still going to choose him. And maybe for one of the first times in her life, she looked at these 2 men who were not there to use her or abuse her. These men were literally there to bring her Jesus. To finish up, just remember, Satan does not waste bullets. If he's not coming after you, then there's probably a good chance he doesn't need to. If you want the real you to be known by God and the devil, that's, I think, where you want to be. Who you really are needs to be on the devil's radar just as much as anyone else's. When God offered up Job's name to the devil, and God gave Job's name to Satan, Satan didn't come to God with that name. Maybe I suggest you don't become that good that God's offering your name up to the devil. But it showed how close Job was to God. How real God knew who he was. That anything you could throw at him was not going to take away his love for God. My question today is, what is stopping you and I from being used more by God? It can't be what we've done. It seriously can't be. It can't be what you think. It can't be what you say. It can't be any of those things. You're too old, you're too young, you're too single, you're too married. Too much sin in your life, you're too perfect. Maybe not perfect enough. But you can't stop God from choosing and using the real you because of labels the world puts on you. None of that matters to God. He will use you before you ever even need to change. And once he uses you, change will happen. He just wants the real you to trust him. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the Bible, the stories you've given us, the people, the heroes. And you didn't hide stuff from us. You didn't hide the fact that people had really bad things going on in their lives. You've let us know the real them so that the real us may not be as scary. Help us to choose you each and every time, and help us to take whatever you want us to do and run with that, to not do a Jonah on you, but to say, use me where I am, change me, mold me, make me. In your name, amen.